There we
Hello,
go.
and welcome back to the world's most inconsistent MMA show. My name is Daniel Martin. I'm here with my co-host, as always, Sriram, and we are joined today with a very special guest, one of who is in relation with one of the most acclaimed and heralded camps in MMA history in Tristar. We are very fortunate to present Aiemann Zahabi.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm glad to be on. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely, yeah, anytime. We are very fortunate. I think it was Zach Makovsky that kind of
Yeah.
got us in touch. Okay, because we've had
He thinks
Zach
you
on
guys
in the
are
past.
amazing. He only tells me great things about you guys.
Well, we love
Talks you up
Zach.
big.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this is awesome. Like this is so much fun that we get to know more people from this gym up in Canada, and Aiemann has offered to join us on this podcast as we are discussing and analyzing the aftermath of maybe the most depressing event of the year for Sriram.
Incredibly.
If anybody listens to the show and follows us on Twitter, you know that Sriram and I are always at each other's throats when it comes to fighters that we like. But this was a bridge too far. I I actually genuinely felt bad by the end of the night because the four fights that we're talking about today, the four fights that we really care about, all were almost drawn up to just end in the worst way possible for you.
Pretty much.
It was like it was like a confluence. It was like a concert of depression and anxiety for for you. As
I mean, in
You don't think so?
retrospect, perhaps shouldn't have picked the old guys in this one to like, but and that's also why you shouldn't pick the old guys in any sport. So it is what it is. I mean,
um, but that is what we're going to be talking about. For those who don't know, the way we're going to run through it today is we're going to talk about the flyweight bout between Alex Perez and Jussier Formiga. Then we're going to jump up to Sean O'Malley versus Eddie Wineland, Aljamain Sterling versus Corey Sandhagen, and then finishing off with Cody Garbrandt knocking out Rafael Assuncao. But to start off with our flyweights with Perez Formiga, I'm actually going to pitch it over to Aiemann. Mr. Zahabi, what were your thoughts going into this fight, and kind of what were you thinking the dynamics were, and how did it play out?
Well, I thought Formiga would have shot in a little earlier, like after receiving the first couple of calf kicks. Because he threw, I think, 2 calf kicks in the first minute that landed pretty good. And you could tell it was pretty obvious he kept going for the leg throughout the fight until he stopped him. But I was shocked that he didn't try to shoot on one of the kicks, to use it as a setup. Even though, like this, if you're not going to check him, might as well use them to your advantage at some point, So I thought that would have been a little bit different. But I would have to say, like, out of all the fights, these guys had the best guards. Like, the way their hands were positioned and the way they were throwing their punches, it looked very high level. Like, they were the more skilled fights out of the fights I think we were going to discuss.
yeah. I mean, I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't appreciate about Formiga's striking because I mean it's kind of low volume and weird compared to what people consider as good striking. But this was actually a really really fun fight for as long as it went. I think going into it, a lot of us expected Formiga, excuse me, to look a lot worse because he's kind of getting up there in age at a low division, and the Moreno fight wasn't particularly encouraging, but he looked very very good against an opponent who was because Alex Perez, a lot of what he does on the feet is just he's very very aggressive, as we saw in the Shorty Torres fight, and Formiga's been historically quite good at navigating that. We saw that with even the Davison Figueiredo fight. So that was good. It just I don't like favoring someone who's getting kind of physically brittle moving forward at this stage. I think Formiga's still one of the more skilled guys. It's just athleticism has always been kind of a liability for him, and it seems to be getting a bit worse.
Yeah, so like just talk about athleticism in general for MMA. When it comes to athleticism, grapplers are not the most athletic. Okay, they don't run particularly fast and they don't jump particularly high compared to regular athletes. Okay, so let's say like I remember years ago we went to the track. So we train we run. We do different track workouts or whatever, and we had a track coach. and it was me and a couple of other high-level fighters, and we had two world-class elite grapplers with us, okay? And they do this little test where they put your feet in those, on that metal thing where you push off, I forget what it's called, and they time how long it takes your feet to leave the pad. Okay, so they know how many milliseconds. Okay, so let's say an Olympian is somewhere between like 0.5 and 0.6 milliseconds to get off that thing. Okay, the grapplers were in 0.05 for our Olympic sprinter. Sorry, and the grapplers were at 0.5. Okay, so it's a huge difference. A huge difference between the guys who just do jiu-jitsu, who are that type of athlete, and a guy who's a sprinter, like a full-on professional sprinter. We're talking about hundreds of milliseconds. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, they're milliseconds. When it comes to reaction time, it's huge. Every hundredth of a millisecond is like a mile. Okay, so if you want to see a punch coming to your face, and I'm punching at 100 milliseconds, and you're punching at 200 milliseconds, I'm gonna beat you to the punch. So a guy like Formiga, that's why I found it strange, because he's getting up there in age. It would be more advantageous for him to get into a grappling match than to keep it in striking for as long as it went. The longer it kept going in striking, I felt that the physical attributes will count more and more and more. So that's why you see like Damian Maia. This guy's not like a super efficient striker, very high speed punching, kicking. But if he ties you up, he can slow you down enough that he can always get back into body-to-body clinching, taking you down, grappling you. And on the ground, they're much faster.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to kind of approach Formiga at this point in his career. He is a fighter who I think he's always benefited by really nice timing. Like I think that's probably one of his more underrated qualities as a striker and as a wrestler. He is very good at catching reactive takedowns and things of that sort. Like he's a well-timed fighter. I think the problem that Sriram and I sort of discussed before the fight was that he is not someone who tends to convert a ton of offense, and he's not a fighter who tends to win if he can't consistently out-wrestle guys. Like I think that there was probably a chance that he could have taken Perez down. I think considering where he's at physically, you sort of have to wonder if he could actually convert that into like a 3-round decision win. I mean, who was the last person that Formiga was able to consistently take down? I guess it was Sergio, right? And that was a couple of years ago.
Figueiredo, kind of. But not
Figueiredo, really. That's true.
I mean, he had some trouble there, even turning that into anything that actually scored. But
I like a lot of Formiga's ideas. I think he's a smart, like he's got a good sense of like punch and clutch, where he does a good job entering the clinch reactively. There's more another example of him having nice timing is when he enters the clinch off his opponent's striking or off of his own exits to kind of smother their punches and then getting out, angling off. The issue for me was that, and this was actually a bit of a surprise because, like, as we talked about, Sriram, Formiga sometimes has difficulty scoring, but he actually did a nice job of it here. Yeah. Like his left hook looked really sharp, as Aiemann pointed out. His guard was nice. Formiga's always had nice shot selection. He was actually going strike for strike with Perez for much of the fight. I don't know if he kind of was trying to control the pace that way, or I don't know if he just felt like he didn't have it in him to consistently try to hit takedowns. But I felt like the leg kicks were maybe just a little bit. I felt like they were supplementary to the finish. I don't think it was just Perez landing a couple leg kicks and that was kind of the end of it. Like Perez was actually doing a nice job as the fight went on of like weaving into his left hook. He's always done well with that. And the fact that he could just afford to throw in, more extended exchanges with Formiga and just have the physical strength and the physicality to just be there when they ended. Like I said, I was actually bummed too. I was actually loving this fight when it was going on. I really wanted to see 3 full rounds of it. But I think the physicality edge is something maybe Formiga's I don't know how much I can pick Formiga to win fights that he can't consistently out wrestle guys in. So it was on that end, it was a little bit of a bummer. Aiemann, did you have anything else for this one?
Yeah, I would just add that, like you said, that he was able to get inside and stay clutch, like close in exchange with him on the inside, and then he'd bounce out. The other thing is, if I would, like with his skill set, instead of bouncing out, he should have tied him up and forced him to wrestle. Because guys who are more fast twitch, okay, guys who have amazing speed, they lose some of that speed when you tie up their arms and you exhaust them. You know, like I remember when, let's say, when GSP fought BJ Penn, one of the first parts of the game plan is when you grab that single leg, don't take him down. Just keep him up against the cage and force him to defend the single for as long as you can, and work your way around the single. Just get him to use his arms, because BJ Penn has a world-class left hook. Okay, he can drop almost anybody with that thing. It doesn't matter how big you are. You know, it's fast, it's hard to see, and he's got great power. So we want to eliminate one of his best weapons, which would be like that fast left hook that he throws in to counter. So I just think, like, if Formiga, when he landed those counter punches, when he took some on the arms and he stepped in and he got close enough, he could have converted them to a clinch or a single leg or a double leg, and then forced the fight against the cage enough to drain the guy and then eventually score that takedown. There's a lot to be said about, you know, a guy like Ben Askren. He's not the greatest striker, but if he grabs a hold of you, it's hard to get back up and knock him out. It's not easy because you're drained, you know. But that's it. That's all I have to say for that one.
Yeah, I think one thing that Formiga could have been thinking about was something that our friend Ryan mentioned a lot about Perez. He has a really cool wrestling style top game. He does some cool stuff from the front headlock. I think he got a Darce choke finish early in his UFC career. So I think that could have been something, because if Formiga ended up on the bottom, that could have been a bit annoying for him in terms of like burning time, especially considering the thing that we mentioned earlier about how Formiga doesn't do like a ton of dazzling offensive things. Like, even in the first couple minutes of striking, it felt like Perez was landing a bit harder, apart from that one really cool knee that Formiga timed with that weave. That was, it was like right before the finish. It was terrific. But yeah, I think, and this is something that we'll probably get back to with Rafael Assuncao, but the issue with being this kind of crafty fighter against a better athlete is that you just don't operate on the margins that you probably need moving forward. And, you know, with Alex Perez and Cody Garbrandt, it's even more striking, because not only are they on the decline, but these are genuinely terrific athletes. So, you know, even if you're like the quote unquote better guy, the craftier guy who's like, you know, kind of sharper in some respects, you don't really have the ability to navigate them as much as you might need to.
Speaking of,
it's not gonna be easy.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Aiemann.
No, I was just gonna say, yeah, I agree. It's not gonna be easy. I'm just saying that's one route to victory. You know.
Well, I hope Formiga can get back on track, because I really like watching him fight. And I know it probably sounds like he's kind of at the tail end of his career, but he does a lot of really fun, exciting stuff, and he does some unique things and has a kind of unique framework to his game that obviously makes Sriram love him. So I hope they give him someone that he can bounce back against. I don't know how much longer he's going to be in like the flyweight top 10, but we like watching him fight. And for Perez, I mean, shit, they could do Perez Figueiredo right now, and that'd be tons of fun instead of Figueiredo Benavidez too. But anyway, moving on. I gotta say, I was impressed to a degree with Sean O'Malley's win over Eddie Wineland. I know it was like a win that he was expected to get, but O'Malley is actually starting to look like he's figuring it out as a prospect. We can talk about the nitty gritty in a second, but just general impressions of where we're at with Sean O'Malley. What do we think?
I think so. As you mentioned, this was one that he was like supposed to win. Like Eddie Wineland, I love him in his prime. I didn't really expect him to get this one, unlike the two that we're about to talk about, because he was literally the first ever WEC bantamweight champion. He was a title contender in the Barao era. You're really not supposed to last that long. It would be super weird if he did. But this pretty much went as well as it could for Sean O'Malley, and I think moving forward, there are guys who could compete with him at range, I think, but it's just, I think there's some room to grow for him in terms of career trajectory, and he's going to be interesting moving forward at the very least. He's probably top 15 right now, but there are opponents that I think could cause him some trouble.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. Like, kind of expected him to win this one, which is, he has to do what he's meant to do, and he did it with an exclamation mark. So he didn't just win like we expected. He did a great job doing it. But I do think there are a lot of guys in the bantamweight division who are going to give him a lot of, who can give him a lot of trouble. Because I saw like he's very good. He's a very good striker. His skills are good. The way he throws punches and stuff is very good. I'm wondering. Like Eddie Wineland did land a good right hand early on because he is looking for that big shot, Sean. And some of the times he's not as defensive as, let's say, a Conor McGregor. Because Conor, like, they do similar stuff, Sean and Conor. But I feel like Conor respects his defense a little bit more. He's a little bit tighter. But that could be with experience too. And like, he's definitely a very good prospect who I would like to see fighting. I'd like to see him grow as a fighter in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. He's I think I agree with you, and that's an experience thing. O'Malley might take someone that O'Malley can't just walk over. It might take like a John Dodson or someone tough, who he can't just knock out and keep moving. For him to kind of understand the value of like limiting exchanges and subtle slips and pulls that his style should be integrated well in his style. I like O'Malley. I like that he seems to have he obviously has a good sense of his own range. I like that he has at least a more, slightly deeper understanding of angles than a lot of MMA fighters, especially a lot of MMA fighters at the place in his career that he is. Like, he was doing a good job of letting Wineland take the outside angle, and then he would kind of hit like an inside angle right hook or a body kick. The cautionary point for O'Malley, outside of just his defense, as you pointed out, Aiemann, is that I like seeing O'Malley feint, but to me it looks like a lot of his feints aren't necessarily congruent with his offense. Like, he'll do a lot of kind of false starts and like turns with his head, but it looks like a lot of it is more just to sort of throw the opponents off. It isn't always to like bait out specific responses from an opponent to counter. It's like I always like seeing fighters feint as opposed to not feint. But maybe this is just me. Maybe this is something that'll settle more in time. But like, it does seem like a lot of how he feints and a lot of what he does at this point in his career is mostly just kind of misdirection for the sake of misdirection. I think if he had a more active lead hand, like a more active jab, he would actually be able to disguise a lot of his feints and draw counters a bit better. Because he does that well. Like, when he actually gets a response from an opponent who's chasing him, with punches, as Wineland did, then he can kick them on the way in. He can sort of take angles on them and counterpunch. He can set up his right hand, but it did look a little bit nascent. Did it look that way for anybody else, or am I just spewing nonsense?
Yeah, I think at this stage it's not the best comparison, but like someone like Johnny Walker, who could just like kind of run over guys by just like twitching a lot, like, oh, he's big and strong and he's going to do something, I don't know what, but better be really freaked out. Like, at this stage of the guys he's fighting, especially with like kind of old, slower guys, it's going to be tough for them to handle that. So I think moving forward, that could be something he improves. But yeah, overall, I agree. There aren't a ton of guys in MMA, and that's something that I think if you follow sports like kickboxing, which I know Danny does, it's kind of harder to see in MMA that guys are really intentional with their feinting, because, to pull out specific counters, because one, they're just not as good at it as a lot of kickboxers are, and two, a lot of opponents aren't as good at countering specific ideas. So it's kind of harder to see it, and it's either going to be, freak them out with it or just use a ton of feinting to hide the fact that you're going to do something, regardless of what that thing is. But yeah, I think O'Malley, he could struggle. If I were to look at a fighter who could trouble him, it would probably be someone who could pressure him safely, which is something that a lot of guys couldn't do because Wineland, he kind of just floats around. He like tries to move forward, but he's not like a concerted pressure fighter, if that makes sense. And someone who could, kick with him on the outside. And I'm not sure how many of those guys there are at bantamweight, but, maybe even something like length parity could be something that troubles him because a lot of the guys he's been facing don't have that. And a lot of what O'Malley does offensively is that distance trap, Conor McGregor type thing. There are some guys there who could do some things. I'm just not really sure where his ceiling is right now, even just in his current form.
Yeah, so if I want to just touch upon the feints, I feel like, yeah, you're right. They're a little bit obvious in a way. Some of them, I wouldn't say all of his feints are not great, but it is easier to see than you would like. But it also, I think that's more of an experience thing. And the more he fights, the more subtle he'll make them. The more training hours he puts in, the more and more subtle. And I think those feints, if he keeps doing them, eventually he'll find that sweet spot where it's guys question whether or not something is coming, not, oh yeah, that was a fake, Whereas then when you talked about also his reach, like if I was gonna say something about the fight, like for me, okay, if I'm fighting a guy with that much more of a reach, like I fought a guy who had a little bit more of a reach than me in Ricardo Ramos, and I fought with my hands up because every inch counts for more than an inch, counts for a mile. That's what we say Tristar. An inch is a mile. 100th of a millisecond is a mile. So you can't mess around when a guy has a longer reach than you. And if you watch Eddie Wineland, his hands were at his chest, right at his nipple line. And to be fast enough at 35 against a 25-year-old whose main thing is striking, who's got a much longer reach than you, it was my favorite strategy for him. Even though, like, early, he did land a couple of good shots. He's obviously a good fighter, a great fighter. I just think maybe that shot wouldn't have been as devastating if it would have cut some of his forearm. I think fighting your hands down is a great style if you have the reach and the skill. Let's say Wonderboy always fights with his hands down majority of the fight. But, there are moments where he puts his hands up, and I don't think fighting with your hands down is necessarily wrong all the time. But for this fight, it was a huge height advantage, a huge reach advantage, and someone who was a very comfortable striking. Even though his feints weren't great, a lot of the time he could punch Wineland before Wineland can punch him, or kick Wineland before Wineland had a chance of hitting him back. And he took advantage of that. He did a great job.
Yep, I agree. I mean, we got to remember O'Malley he's 5 years into his career. He's a young gun. Has 12 pro fights, which is pretty good experience, but he's young in his career. There is plenty of time to right this ship. Like I'm not knocking him. He had a solid performance and he did exactly what was expected of him. It was more just like maybe it is just kind of an experience and a comfort thing. When he fight, maybe it'll take an opponent who is a bit longer. Maybe it is someone like Corey Sandhagen, who we'll talk about next. Someone who's a bit longer and rangier, who doesn't give O'Malley that kind of insularity that he's used to, for him to realize that he needs to be a little more disciplined and diligent with his feints. But other than that, I was impressed. Next on the docket was supposed to be the main event of the weekend, and boy howdy did it end quickly. I was even a little bit bummed. I really wanted to see these guys fight a little bit longer. Aljamain Sterling ran over Corey Sandhagen and tapped him in under 90 seconds. Sriram, you were big on the Sandhagen train going in. What stuck out to you?
I mean, I think Aljamain, and this is something that our friend and colleague Ed Gallo mentioned, that Sandhagen, a lot of what he does in terms of wrestling is kind of, he doesn't pay attention to like the first stage of fighting grips. He kind of just turns to his scrambling, and that's one thing that he did here. He gives up the back a decent amount, and Aljamain Sterling, he fought a genuinely brilliant fight. Like, I've seen him fight smart fights before. He did a good job with Pedro Munoz, managing the distance well. He did a good job with Jimmy Rivera, fighting a all the way in or all the way out type game, where Jimmy Rivera is kind of like a tank who wants to be in the mid range. But this was next level from Aljamain Sterling in that he just came out, he did exactly what he needed to do, pushed Corey Sandhagen back hard, got him to the fence. Where Sandhagen, like, I think Sandhagen, he's a bit more nascent than a lot of us want to think. Because he's, as you mentioned with Sean O'Malley, Sandhagen's only 5 years into his career, and his rise has been even crazier. Because he's 5 years into his career, he has wins over John Lineker, a win over Rafael Assuncao. It's genuinely ridiculous. But there's going to be some spots of, he doesn't do some things as well as other fighters do things, because he's 5 years into his career. But I think, yeah, Sterling he fought the perfect fight to take Sandhagen out of his comfort zone, and Sandhagen, for all his strengths, his scrambling strength, for example, he fights like he can't be submitted. And a lot of people can't, but Aljamain Sterling has the best top game in the division. So, I think there's a place for Sandhagen to go here once he develops a little bit more. But this was, it was Aljo's masterpiece.
Yeah, I agree that Aljamain played it perfect for this fight. Like, for the matchup, he did exactly what he was supposed to do in terms of game planning. His game planning was excellent. He put the guy right up against the cage, grabbed him. He knows the guy, sometimes gives up his back. He went for it. The guy gave up his back. He jumped on. He took advantage. And if I were to get more to the specifics, I think he played the back position extremely well. Like, right away, he put on that choke, even though the guy's chin was down, was crushing his jaw. And Sandhagen did a very good job of getting it out enough that Aljamain had to let go. And then he did get two hands on one, but it wasn't perfect, his attempt to escape. And I feel like maybe when he was almost out at one point, and then if you see Aljamain post his hand on the mat and then grabs him with his left arm and pulls him back into the choke, I feel like that at that moment when Sandhagen was turning to his right, he should have went quickly to use the mat to scrape Aljamain off. Instead of going face down, he should have, the angle he got to start was good, and then all of a sudden he should have shifted back to face him to kind of get him off his back and then maybe enter the mount. But if Aljamain would have opened his legs to mount him or to do whatever, maybe there would be a brief chance to, go to half guard and tie him up and then work your escape from there, or fight from mount bottom, because you don't want Aljamain on your back.
Nope. That is for damn sure. Yeah, I think you pretty much covered it. I had kind of the same read as Sriram, is that, like, I don't like a lot of what Sandhagen does in the clinch. I know he's been a fighter who's been willing to, like you say, he's been willing to kind of roll and scramble his way out. He doesn't fight grips incredibly well when he's locked up. And I was impressed that Aljamain didn't have to, it wasn't even like a specific takedown into top control. Like, it was just the fact that all he had to do was just kind of get in on Sandhagen's hips, and then Sandhagen would sort of turn and try to build his base. And that was enough of a window that Aljamain was immediately able to just clamp onto his back. Yeah, like I said, there's not really a ton to say here, other than, it was Aljamain's early pressure was incredibly smart. The only thing I'd say is just that, like, this is kind of what I imagined was going to happen, especially if Sandhagen was going to be as lax in grappling and clinch positions as he's been in the past. When you almost get tapped by Yuri Alcantara, you're probably a safe bet that you're not going to be able to avoid some bad positions against Aljamain Sterling. But yeah, like I said, that I was kind of hoping that we had more to say on that one, because I was hoping we get 3 rounds to talk about, but unfortunately it was just a real quick finish, and that was it. But there is actually more to discuss on the last fight, that we want to touch on, which is Cody Garbrandt versus Rafael Assunção. Obviously this was a must win. Like, this was a do or die for Garbrandt, and he got it done. But I'm not really sure what to make of this performance. I don't know if this is, like, Sherm and I have both written about Garbrandt at different points, and I'm not sure if this is, quote unquote new and improved Cody Garbrandt, as much as this was just, I don't know, he just didn't really bite on anything, and then he was able to draw out a somewhat uncharacteristic reaction from a patient fighter like Assuncao. Sriram, I know you were invested in this fight beforehand. What stuck out to you when you rewatched it?
Yeah, I don't really buy into the new and improved Garbrandt. I think because a lot of Garbrandt's issue, and this is something that you mentioned, Danny, in your first Garbrandt article, was that his issue isn't necessarily defense in a vacuum. It's more that when he gets into exchanges, like 3 or 4 punches in, he squares up and kind of just goes mad. And Assuncao, he didn't really force that kind of exchange. I think the thing to take away from the first 4 minutes and 55 seconds of each round was that Garbrandt, he still doesn't really know how to enforce his own range. And I think that's going to be a problem moving forward because, I mean, for example, like the obvious thing is like a fight with Sean O'Malley has been talked about, and that's obviously way too soon for Sean O'Malley. But like I kind of have concerns given how easily Garbrandt conceded a mid-range kicking match with Rafael Assuncao, that someone who's just long and kind of runs around him could just make Garbrandt concede that kind of fight instead of actually trying to cover distance, especially with the threat of like a single counter. Because the thing with Garbrandt is that historically, even back to guys like Marcus Brimage, he kind of needed guys to consent to the fight that he wanted. Like if Brimage kind of fainted in, got in and out quick, Garbrandt couldn't really get to the point where he wanted. And Garbrandt kicked with Marcus Brimage, he kicked with TJ Dillashaw, he waited for those guys to come in. And he waited for Rafael Assuncao to come in too. Every time Garbrandt found success with his hands, it wasn't on the lead, it was on the counter. And the problem was that he couldn't draw out what Assuncao was going to do. He needed to wait for Assuncao to do it. So if someone just doesn't give him those opportunities, I have to question what Garbrandt does with, like if someone just punches and kicks long from out of range of his twos and threes, what's Garbrandt going to do? And it's a question worth asking. But insofar as Assuncao, I think Assuncao looked tentative. He didn't really want to lead with his hands either, and we saw at the end why that was because he was notably outsped on the inside. He wanted to kick with Garbrandt, but I think there was kind of a volume deficit there too. Because Assuncao, like even since the Sandhagen fight, he's been having some trouble with his own volume. So I think he ultimately just expected Garbrandt to be less smart than he was. And given Garbrandt's history, I can't necessarily say that's a bad decision. I think he expected Garbrandt to like shift forward into counters over and over again so he wouldn't have to be the one covering distance. But it didn't work, and he felt the urgency and ran into a counter. It was rough, but I'm not really sure what to make of Garbrandt's improvement after that.
Yeah, no, has he improved a lot, or is he just more chilled out for the fight and they took away his bloodlust in the sense that, like, listen, don't go out there and go crazy. We know you have bloodlust. We know you have it in you. We know you're tough. You don't got to prove it this time around. Let's chalk up a W and be patient. And that's what it looked like. I think that Assuncao was outstriking him, not by a crazy amount, but I do think Assuncao was more active early, and that I think maybe his coaches or somebody else had spoken to him and listen, just pick your shots, be calm, get really warmed up, and then later on in the fight, if you really feel like you need to let go of that bloodlust, maybe we would have seen it in round 3. Maybe in round 3 he would have went bonkers. Who knows? We don't know yet, right? Because he didn't get to round 3. But the patience paid off big, okay? Garbrandt has power, and that power can stay for a while. Now we know. Listen, he's going to knock you out in the third. He can knock you out whenever. Like you said with Marcus Brimage, I do feel like Marcus was doing pretty good until he got hurt. Like, he was doing very well. Okay, so that was a great point, and I do feel like someone, let's say, like if we had a 135-pound Yair Rodriguez, someone who's just gonna keep kicking you and moving around and kicking you and moving around and kicking you. If he stays this calm, this laid back, it might destroy his forearms. Maybe he won't be as willing to throw the punches, and then we're gonna have to see him pull out that wrestling that he talks about, and see what his wrestling is gonna be like, or who knows what, So definitely an interesting fight, and I will mention that Assuncao had both hands down. Okay. He threw the kick, came back, both hands down below his chest, and bang, he got smashed with the right hand. Like, both hands. I can't believe how low some fighters are willing to put their hands fighting someone who has KO power. my last fight, I overdid it. Like my last fight against Vince Morales. Okay, I saw his fights. I saw that he's got power in his right hand. I'm like, listen, no matter what, don't get hit with the right. So that's what I really did. I think I only gave up like one good right hand I got hit with. But the rest of the time, I just took them on the arms. But I was too conservative, like because the fight before I went too crazy. So this fight I went too conservative. But there's a happy middle that fighters need to find. And I do feel like that's the thing. You want to respect the guy, but not fear him enough that you don't throw enough. And I just feel like Assuncao in that one moment, he went too relaxed. I feel like he knew it was the end of the round. He's like, there's no way he's gonna catch me now. Bang, get caught. You see, you can't stop till that bell rings. You can't freaking stop. Cody's got power. He's done it before. And like, it's rare to have someone with KO power that late in the fight at bantamweight. We're not heavyweights, okay? Not everyone has that power. So if you see a bantamweight knocking guys out in round 2, knocking guys out in round 3, or anything later, they have power. That you have to respect. If a guy only knocks guys in the first minute, it could be anxiety, it could be his nerves, and that power might fade quick. But some guys are gifted for it to last a while. And those guys you have to respect bell to bell.
Yeah. I think I agree with all that. It was kind of an out of nowhere, like complete knockout. Like I wasn't shocked to see Cody drop Assuncao. I was shocked to see him just highlight Assuncao. I think that Cody. That's the thing. I'm kind of with you, Sriram. Is I'm not sure how much. I'm not sure really what to parse out of this performance. Like. He will be a fighter who is difficult to exchange with, and it is notable that the ones who've been successful in doing that are ones who had, either granite heads like Pedro Munoz, or they had a really specific read on when his counters were with TJ. The thing that made me laugh in the finishing sequence is that it was such a strange feint that drew Assuncao's right hook out. Like, because if you look at it, like, it looked like Assuncao was trying to do the kind of feint left load up the right hook that TJ did to knock out Garbrandt in their first fight, and what drew it out was Cody like bending over at the waist. It wasn't a jab or like a kick that kind of drew out the response. He was literally, hands were at his hips. He bends at the waist. He goes back up, and Assuncao bites, and Cody just kills him. The thing that I want to remember, and I realize I'm kind of laughing about it. It was funny, but I bring it up because I still don't really know how replicable that moment is for Cody going forward. Like, we know that Cody hits hard, and we know that Cody can probably knock out anybody in this division. We know he's incredibly fast. We know these things about him. But in that moment, like that big highlight knockout, it was off of such a strange exchange that I don't know how many other opponents are gonna respond that way, the way Assuncao did. Does that make any sense? Like, I don't know how many people aren't just gonna see him, backed up to the fence and maybe just kick him, or, try to feint at him to draw something out. Like, it seemed like a bit of I don't think Cody finishing Garbrandt is like a low percentage outcome in and of itself, but that specific exchange was a strange one, and I feel like I don't want to cloud how that actually might impact Cody going forward. Like, Cody and his coaches might look at that and say, "Oh, this is what you need to be doing." But there was still a lot of mistakes in the discipline of Garbrandt that we've seen in the past. Like, a lot of things reared their head here. It's just that it didn't wind up in him losing the fight. You get me?
Yeah. I think, like, it's one thing, because I think Garbrandt historically, and this is something that it's also been seen against, like, Brimage too, is that he trusts himself to win even at positional disadvantages because he's such a huge power hitter. He's so fast. There's really no way that a guy can hang in extended exchanges without those two things you mentioned, either being super smart defensively or just being absolutely unkillable. So I think it's Assuncao. He's generally one of the more sophisticated strikers in the division. But I think a lot of what contributed to that was Assuncao being a bit more impatient than we're used to seeing, because at the end of a round that was kind of 50-50. Round one was also kind of 50-50. And Assuncao, I think he's generally more comfortable commanding the fight than he is fighting a 50-50 fight, which is true of anyone. But, if he's going to be patient, I think it's going to be in a fight where he's in control. So that's one thing. And B, Assuncao just kind of being a bit more athletically declined, technically declined than he used to be. Because prime Assuncao, I think he was fairly durable. Like, even Marlon Moraes didn't knock him out the way, and he landed a huge shot. Marlon Moraes is a massive hitter. So even, like, prime Assuncao was crazy durable. He was also fairly fast for the division. I don't really think that it was 100% Assuncao being declined, but I do think that there was some element of Assuncao, like, at least the rest of the fight even, of Assuncao just not being particularly willing to pull the trigger on earlier exchanges, and when he felt the need to pull the trigger, he kind of just went on the first thing that he saw, which happened to be Cody doing a deep bow and, like, kind of being dumb but intelligently. So it was a very, very weird finish. It was a theatrical weird finish that I think it's gonna convince people that Garbrandt is further along than he is in his development.
Yeah, I think the response should have been the guy bends over at the waist, left high kick, like. Because he was already in southpaw. He was set up. Instead of waiting to see what he was going to do coming out of it, once you see a guy bend down that low, just throw the kick, man. So kick him right in the head. If the worst case, he's going to block it. But he wouldn't throw a right hand in the middle of a high kick. It was a tough call. But I find it weird, like, because when you watch the replay, he didn't see the punch coming. And Cody did a boxing slip where he bent halfway over his hips and then came back up. Like, that came from his waist. And to not see it, I don't know what was up with that, and I don't know how he didn't see it. But I will say that if he was in his regular position, if he was in the orthodox position, he would have been able to maybe block it. But I think those calf kicks early on messed up Assuncao. I think he was thinking in his head, he's like, man, my leg is hurting. How am I going to fight him southpaw? I haven't been drilling my entries from this side maybe as much. I don't know. But definitely a weird exchange. And I do want to say that Cody's low kick, when he put his hand on the floor and swung around and did those low kicks, was very cool. And you might be seeing me do that in my next fight.
Awesome. Well, the second you do, we'll shout you out. We'll be looking for it.
Yeah, I thought it was genius because the guy can't kick you in the head if your hand's on the mat. So
yeah, it's true. Yeah.
And how's he going to punch you from there?
He'd have to be reaching down.
He found a hack. He found a hack in real life fighting. That's it. He found the hack.
We found a Tristar hack, and it wasn't even
God.
Tristar.
It's a Garbrandt hack, man. This guy's a genius.
Yeah, the Garbrandt hack. That's right. You gotta give him credit.
He's boxing / kung fu now.
Like, the last thing, the only really big thing I want to say wrapping up all these fights is that, boy, did bantamweight and flyweight show up, because, like, all these were awesome. I mean, like, you gotta give credit to all these guys for their wins, and they were all exciting, they were all interesting, and, like, they just stole the show. I mean, what's more to say about it? Like, bantamweight is such an awesome division, and I think that the top 10 is getting even more competitive. So just all good things. Like, I'm glad that those divisions were actually given spots on the main. I mean, I realized Perez Formiga wasn't, but I'm glad that a lot of the bantamweight fights were put on the main card, and they killed it. But yeah, I think I'm good on my end. This was Are you any less bummed out now, Sriram? Are you still a little? I
mean, Formiga and Assuncao are basically the same person, so I can only be bummed out once collectively for both of them. But yeah, I mean, it was rough, but it is what it is. There's some turnover. I mean, even a fight like Stamen Kelleher was super fun. Mm-hmm. Bantamweight's just not. I mean, bantamweight and flyweight just aren't good for the old fighters, and there's really nothing more you can expect at that point.
But they are good for entertainment value and for skill, which is about as much as you can hope for. So I think I'm good on this end. Aiemann, do you have any last thing you want to add before we wrap this up?
No, I just want to say thanks to you guys. I had a great time, and it was fun being on the show.
Absolutely, we'd love to have you
Thanks
on
for
again.
joining.
You're welcome anytime.
Okay, great.
We said the same thing to Zach when he recorded. Yeah, we
Listen,
love.
guys, Zach hurt Arnold Allen's feelings by not mentioning him in the tweet, so you guys gotta get him on. Arnold Allen, 7-fight win streak in the UFC. I'm telling you, he knows his stuff. Okay, he's very good. I'm doing a shout out for him because Zach, left him out of it.
Arnold, if you're listening, you're welcome. You're welcome
Absolutely,
to come on.
yeah, we'd love to have them both on again. Yeah, that'd be awesome to have Arnold Allen on. He's on such a good streak right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, in case anyone is still listening, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Aiemann Zahabi, for joining us this week.
Pleasure. Thank you, guys.
We should be back soon enough. I don't really know there's anything to talk about next week, but we might find something.
There's Burgos coming up. That could be fun.
Yeah, we can talk about Burgos. We can always talk about Burgos. And for those of you who don't know, please check out our work at thefightsite.com. Sriram, do you have anything coming out this week?
No, probably not this week. Probably something near the end of the month. The Ismagulov piece I mentioned before, something on Michael Johnson, which is going to be fun and sad in equal measure.
Okay. Nice. So some stuff just coming down the pipeline. For me, I just wrote a piece on Ilyas Anahachi, the one flyweight kickboxing champion on the fight site. And it just ran yesterday. So if you haven't read that, go check that out. Please join our Patreon. It supports us, helps us a lot. And thank you to everybody listening, and stay safe.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Ciao.